What's up, everybody? This is Fred Richani of TSC News. I have right here on the line a special guest, Chris Charlton. He is the man who wrote the definitive history of New Japan Pro Wrestling, the critically acclaimed book, Alliance Pride, the turbulent history of New Japan Pro Wrestling, which is available right now on Amazon. He's currently working on another book on the legendary history of the Tokyo Dome. Chris, how's it going?
Good. Yeah, tremendous.
Now, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. We have about a 14-hour time difference. You're in Yokohama, Japan right now. And before we dive deep into the history of Japanese pro wrestling, the current state of Japanese pro wrestling, I understand you have a pretty unique story yourself.
Good grief. Do I? I don't know. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think it's being an expat. It's kind of like eventually you settle into being just, oh, this is where I live and this is at home. But no, I've lived here since I was 21 and much more than that now. So I'm coming up on 13 years here. It was just I think a lot of people come out and they see what's what after finishing college or whatever and thinking a lot of people come and stay for a year and teach English or whatever and then go back, and it's a nice experience for them. But there are some people like me who 1 year turns into 2 years, which turns into several years, and then staying forever. So yeah.
That's pretty cool. And for you, did you have a love for Japanese wrestling prior to immigrating to Japan? Like, did it kind of go hand in hand, or were you always just kind of fascinated with the country, and then from there you kind of fell in love with it?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. Yeah, it was pro wrestling, which kind of came. I sort of started getting into Japanese wrestling around, like, I want to say about 2000 or so, and it would be like my brother got me into it because he would come over and we would sit and watch just some random VHS tapes that he'd bought from somewhere, either like tape trading or just cheap in some used, like a Goodwill kind of situation. So sometimes we'd be watching the WCW 1990 pay-per-view, and sometimes it'd be something else. And like one time that something else was the 94 Super J Cup, which is for fans of Japanese wrestling of a certain generation, that's the show that got their first hit of Japanese wrestling, was like the 94 Super J Cup. It went from there. And so, I think like, I was coming up to finishing college and thinking, what am I going to do with my life after university? I don't want to like kind of a normal job. And then it was like, oh, there's this chance to go out to Japan for a bit. I like wrestling and I like video games, and Japan does both of those, And that's, I thought, why not? So
You decided to take the tall task of writing a book in Alliance Pride, which I thought was tremendous. Why did you feel the need to write it when there's so much about it in Japan? Did you feel like there was a lot lacking when it comes to Europe and the US?
yeah, so Lions Pride this was 2015, and I was doing a podcast at the time with the dearly departed Live Audio Wrestling, from that was sort of shut down, and John Pollock and Waiting, who are now doing post wrestling. So we were doing like a monthly Japanese wrestling podcast, and we'd often get a lot of comments about it's nice that there is like this coverage of what's happening right now, but there were so many Western fans that didn't have the background, that wanted the background. What spurred me as well, I think, was in 2015, you had Wrestle Kingdom that year was going on pay-per-view, where you had Jim Ross and Matt Striker calling it, and that was going on US pay-per-view for the first time. And so there were a lot of people that were drawn into that product, and this was sort of starting this expansion to the West. But people didn't have like a frame of reference as far as the history went, because there was just such a lack of information in English. So, yeah, I mean, that's what prompted me to do a sort of surface level look, I think, at New Japan and just give somebody, give the general fact.
And what were the biggest challenges in writing the book? Because from what I understand, you actually self-published it, right?
Yeah, that was, yeah. I mean, I went to publishers, and like the comeback was, well, it's a niche within a niche, because it is, oh, it's a wrestling book, but even to wrestling book publishers, it was, well, this is Japanese wrestling, and things were starting to pick up steam then in 2015 in the West, but it was still, a little niche. But I knew that there was demand for it. So we did it on Indiegogo and crowdfunded it, and it just blew past any sort of wildest expectations I would have had. So, I mean, I think that clearly showed that there was a demand for this material. Yeah, I mean, it went ahead and did pretty well. Biggest challenge almost was just having all of these physical books in my house that I then had to ship all over the world. So yeah, my poorly much beleaguered, much belated wife had to take those to the post office, which I'm forever in debt for.
So she's the real MVP.
Yeah, she is, absolutely.
And you wrote about it in your book about the turbulent history of New Japan and pro wrestling. I mean, it started out well, had some issues, of course, in the 80s, really kind of a big boom in the 90s and everything with the Musketeers. And then it seems like, based on reading it, Antonio Inoki's obsession with these mixed matchups and proving that his NJPW stars were quote-unquote real seemed to almost be the death knell of New Japan Pro Wrestling. But around that same time in that mid-2000s doldrum period, Pride went down. Kickboxing was still hot for a couple more years, I think, just as a K1 fan, but really never got to the same level. And now it's just it's kind of all over the place. You got Rising that's trying to do its thing again and all that jazz. But I really feel like ever since that whole obsession with Antonio Inoki really going overboard, putting Yuji Nagata in fights with Fedor and whatnot, I feel like that maybe Japanese wrestling has recovered, but to an extent, MMA and kickboxing and other combat sports within Japan haven't. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
It's interesting. I mean, that was one of the things, writing the new book now, there was a lot of that. A lot of it is necessarily looking at that Inokiism era. Yeah, it's interesting to look at it from an MMA perspective as well as a pro wrestling one. And in a way, Inokiism's difficult because you can understand where he was coming from. And Inoki, I think, saw he was kind of put off by guys like Keiji Muto right from the outset and right from that sort of Three Musketeers period, because he saw someone in Muto, someone that was very influenced by his time in America, and he wasn't a big fan of the Americanization of Japanese wrestling, and so his take was, he didn't want matches where people would stall. He didn't want matches where people would taunt to the crowd. He didn't want matches that started with a lockup. He would want something that was more aggressive. And then he kind of saw at the same time, Pride was booming, Pancrase was doing well, whatever. So he's in a way, like, his logic sort of was sound, but he didn't really realize that the audiences were separate, right?
Right, because I think the pro wrestling fans wanted to see them wrestle, and Nakamura, like for him specifically, at his point in his career, he wasn't that great of a pro wrestler, and I think he himself would admit that. And he was kind of rushed into this exhibition match with Fujita, and then went straight to the LA dojo to basically train MMA. So I think the pro wrestling fans didn't really view him as one of theirs, even though Nakamura wanted to be a pro wrestler more than a fighter. So like the wrestling fans wanted to see him dedicated and be a pro wrestler. But to the MMA fans, they were saying, well, he's an Inoki guy, so he's a New Japan guy. He's a pro wrestler. If he'd apply himself to be an MMA fighter, then we'd sit up and take notice. So it was like this neither fish nor fowl thing. And I think like that's where, around that era, UFC would knock on the door of the LA Dojo, of course. And like, so then Lyoto Machida would go into UFC and dedicate himself there. And Nakamura would dedicate himself into pro wrestling, of course.
What I liked about the book is that you did a ranking of some of the most major stars of all time, especially like the junior heavyweights and everything. But I'm wondering now in 2018, in your humble opinion, is there anybody that was more valuable than another at a certain time? I think I'll give an example. I don't know if you follow the NBA at all, but I'll just give an example for the fans like watching this or listening to this. Like, it's like if you took Steph Curry out of the Golden State Warriors right now, I don't think the Warriors would be too hurt because they have Kevin Durant and so much talent and whatnot. But if you took, say, Steph Curry out maybe 5 years ago when the Warriors were becoming an NBA championship team, that would severely hurt them. Is there somebody in a certain time period in New Japan, whether it be Nagata in the early 2000s, Tanahashi when he had the torch passed to him, Inoki back in the day, Okada now, somebody that was the most valuable at a certain time for New Japan that they just could not afford to lose?
I think if you'd taken Tanahashi out right as things were going, then you'd have been really. I think Nagata, you're right. Nagata and Tanahashi, to their respective eras, were key, because with Nagata, Nagata was able to bridge that divide in a way. And even though he did, like we said, he got his ass kicked by Fedor or whatever, but there was he managed to gain a measure of respect from the pro wrestling people at the time, and he was this guy that was put in all of these crazy mixed matches on New Japan cards, and with such a diverse array of opponents, and usually dragged a really good match out of them. And for Tanahashi, to be in there in where he was persisting and he was evolving and doing everything right when the business was still bad. He was somebody that really held it together. But where we are now, I think there's more depth and more depth than we might even know, because I think if you look back to 2 years ago, where suddenly we heard Shinsuke Nakamura is leaving, AJ Styles is leaving, Anderson and Gallows as well. That was really a sort of, I don't know if you remember, the day when all of that news drops, people were writing their think pieces on how New Japan's going to collapse and go out of business within a year. And the opposite happened, and business went better than ever, because it revealed a Tetsuya Naito. It revealed to an extent a Katsuyori Shibata, although that sadly hasn't worked out with his injury. It certainly revealed a Kenny Omega, who is just, I think if there was a person right now that you would say on the New Japan roster that's indispensable, then I would say Kenny Omega. Because he's, in the space of the last couple of years, done far more than AJ Styles could have done, or perhaps even Prince Devitt could have done, in that same position as the foreign ace, in charge of the Bullet Club.
And Chris, I don't know if you remember this, just a couple years ago too, was when those guys left, there was a legit debate of whether or not Kenny Omega could fill AJ Styles' spot. And it seems silly in retrospect, but at the time, even though Kenny was a great wrestler and is still a great wrestler, there were legitimate questions, and I think he's unbelievably over-delivered since then.
Yeah, I think that the people that knew Kenny knew that he would step up, because, he's this guy that, I think that the key thing for Kenny is that he was media friendly here, and as somebody that has spent a good chunk of his career in Japan. I think that the Japanese fans were familiar with him, that he's able to speak Japanese and talk to the Japanese media here, even though his promos would tend to make you think that wasn't the case. But that's like a key thing, because he can go out and talk to a Tokyo Sports, he can go out and talk to a Weekly Pro Wrestling, whatever, and get the word out that way. I think like the people that really knew Kenny knew that he was going to do well, but yeah, to the extent that he has, and it's I don't know, it's easy to be sort of caught in a wind tunnel when you're on, especially for following pro wrestling on social media. You kind of have people around you with similar thoughts to you. But it always feels like Kenny's the biggest star, not just in New Japan, but like I think he's the biggest figure in pro wrestling at large right now. Because he managed to take the ball, run with it, and kind of show not just how good he is in ring, but how much of an everyman he is, and how sort of likable a personality he has outside the ring as well.
Do you feel like they made a mistake by not giving Tetsuya Naito the IWGP title at Wrestle Kingdom? Because I'm watching that, and you're immersed in it, of course. I'm not as much, but I'm watching it from afar on pay-per-view. And, Okada's had an incredible run. I think maybe the greatest in-ring run of all time, which that I've personally seen. But you see Naito, and you see him coming out there, and you see the chants and all the Los Ingobernables de Japon merchandise. And, I'm waiting for this moment for him to be crowned, and then he just loses. Now, granted, it looks like he's going to be working a program with Chris Jericho. That's a hell of a consolation prize. He's still a big star and everything. But I just feel like, to an extent, it kind of felt like those times in WWE where a guy's got momentum, and then for whatever reason, at the time, when it seems like the right time, they don't go with him as champion. Was that the feeling at the Tokyo Dome based on what you gathered, or do you think a guy like Naito, given the level of star he's at right now, will be okay?
I think Naito's like more than okay. I think as well, like it's a mark of how successful and how good he is in that spot, that he's able to make people who are sort of, I hate to use the word, but like people who are quote unquote smart to the whole deal, but that he's able to play the sort of Raging Against the Machine, underdog, anti-establishment type so well that when he does lose, you have like people who call themselves art fans saying, the management, they screwed him over again. It's like that's exactly the character he's playing. But no, I think that I don't think his story is anywhere near done. I think if you look at that match, if you rewatch that match knowing that Naito lost, it almost makes that it makes the match a whole bunch better almost, because the story that you have there of like Tetsuya Naito, like this guy that became the leader of Los Ingobernables, like after he lost that fan vote to Okada, after he got screwed out of his main event spot. And so he changed his character. He was a very like a good wrestler, but without any real sort of substance to him. And it's like you're kind of looking at him going, who really are you? And he found this sort of anti-establishment character, and he said it himself in interviews, like he stopped really worrying about what people were thinking. He stopped really worrying about how he was going to get over, and instead he did what he wrestled the way he wanted to and started enjoying himself. And that's when he had this surge of popularity behind him. So then when he goes into this match, he's got like the biggest momentum. He's got all the momentum that you could hope for. But in the back of his mind, like he's still that sort of clean cut babyface happy-go-lucky kind of wrestler. And so it's so interesting to watch that match where he has everything in hand on Okada, but like he keeps on going for the Stardust Press, which is a move he hasn't used, and since he was that sort of generic babyface, because like all of a sudden he was thinking about the people, he was thinking about the moment, instead of winning the match. I definitely love that match on a lot of different levels, but I think as well, like, it was Naito's, if you remember back to like Wrestle Kingdom 9, when everybody thought it was Okada's time to finally vanquish Tanahashi in the Tokyo Dome, and then it was Tanahashi won and Okada was walking away, and you had that great shot of Okada in tears and like Gedo with his hand over his shoulder. And this match was the same again. It was all the momentum behind Naito. Okada wins and Naito walks away, but this time, unlike Okada was crying on his way back to the ring, and Naito just like looks to the crowd and has this wry grin on his face, because he knows like, we're going to do this again. And, and that's the thing of it. I think like a lot of, wrestling, if you've watched Japanese wrestling from a Western perspective, you're used to it being in 3 acts, because that's the way we're taught how stories work, where you have that dark middle period, and then you have your resurgence or what have you, and the good guy triumphs at the end. But Japanese wrestling, Japanese stories have 4 acts instead of 3. And so what we found here was like you're going up and up and up, and then suddenly everything takes a left turn. So I think we're at the end of the 3rd act of 4 instead of the 3rd act of 3 here.
And when you put it that way, it's actually kind of more realistic, because in real life, things don't always turn out the way it seems.
Yeah, exactly. I think like that's the thing, and at the end of the day, like it isn't. If you're watching wrestling in the sense of it, if you're not watching it in a meta sense, but you're watching it in the moment, and you're watching it as it's presented as a sport, then the best guy's going to win. The guy with the sort of killer instinct is going to win. And then like Okada had the killer instinct that night, and he is the best. But then you go, well, who's better than the best? Could it be Naito? Could it be Kenny Omega, perhaps?
Dave Meltzer has talked about how Gato, the booker of New Japan Pro Wrestling, and of course his manager, wants Okada to one day surpass Antonio Inoki, be a guy that's going to looked at in the same breath, giving him this run, breaking all these records, having these incredible matches. 5 to 10 years from now, how do you think that Japanese wrestling fans are going to be viewing Kazuchika Okada?
I don't think like it's difficult, because it's difficult to put Okada in the same breath as Inoki, because of who Inoki was, in terms of being a promoter, in terms of being a creative person, and it's the same as well with the Misawa, because of what he did creatively as well, and as a president. But I think purely in ring, you would be hard pressed to find someone that's had a better sort of where are we now? Like 5-6 years into this stretch. And it's remarkable. I mean, the guy is 30. That's crazy. Like, he's just turned 30. And if he, and knock on wood and God willing, it won't happen, but like, if he would, if he broke his neck tomorrow and had to call it a career, I think already you would say he would be an all-timer. He would be a top 5 all-timer. He'd be a top 3 all-timer. Yeah, I mean, he was a guy that's been put in this situation, and he's been a sort of hand-chosen guy, but he's consistently proven himself worthy of that. Whoever you put him in with, like it's going to be phenomenal. And yeah, the fact that he still has at least like 10 really good years in front of him, that's an amazing thing. That's an amazing thought to have,
2017, was that, in terms of just Japanese pro wrestling, was that the best in-ring year you've ever seen?
Oh, yeah, maybe. It seems, it seemed like I'd come back from a show or just finish watching a show and then go, oh, that match was in any other year, like the match X would have been match of the year,
Well, Chris, we really do appreciate all the time you've given us, 14-hour time difference and all. Before we let you go, can you tell fans about Lions Pride, where they can find it, as well as the new book you're working on titled Eggshell?
Yeah, so Lions Pride is out right now on Amazon or Kindle. Little pro tip here: if you go ahead and buy it on Kindle, I won't mind. It's a good deal cheaper, and I also get more money that way. So do that. And the new book is Eggshells, which is pro wrestling in the Tokyo Dome. The Tokyo Dome's coming up to 30 years. It celebrates its 30th anniversary this year. And there've been 64 shows. And so what Eggshells is a collection of deep dives on every single show that's been there. I had a very exhausting last year and a bit where I watched every single match that's been in the Tokyo Dome that made tape. And I made the point of going out and finding a lot of like the personal stories there. So, I talked to a lot of people that were announcing the shows, a lot of people that were working on the shows. So, you have a lot of interviews in there from guys like Rocky Romero, Kenny Omega, down to like Kenta Kobashi, Kota Ibushi. So yeah, it's something I'm really excited to bring everybody. It's going to be out. I can't really point down an exact time, but hopefully somewhere around the summer, there'll be more to talk about around then. And you can go to eggshellsbook.com for more of that information. I was just about to forget that URL. But
and we can follow you on Twitter, right, at ReasonJP?
Yep, that's right.
Great. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. We'll definitely have you back on when that Eggshell book comes out. Certainly looking forward to it. We appreciate all the work you do. Fans, if you don't follow him online, you got to follow Chris online. Always print out the translations, always has the scoops, always has tremendous analysis. I can't appreciate this time enough, man. Thank you so much.